Hi, everyone. Welcome to this workshop on new requirements for ethical geographic science and rapid research. So this is a workshop. Our goal today is to allow all of you to engage with scholars at this conference, participate in some new discussions, make new connections. So if you are comfortable sharing your camera, please do. That's the best way to see one another and try to get to know each other. But if you don't feel bad, you can stay invisible. Sometimes there's a lot going on in the background. But during this workshop, you'll be able to talk, to discuss these questions on requirements for ethical geographic science. So I want to welcome everybody. Hi, I see a few of you have already put their camera on, so please feel the urge to do so. I want to welcome also the moderators of this session, Cheryl, Ranu, Jonghyun, Emily, and Michelle Kinser. Michelle won't be presenting, but she's here. She'll give a few words of introduction. If each of you could quickly introduce yourselves, just like in a quick 30 seconds, that'd be great. Maybe we can go in the order I just mentioned.
I'm Emily Fecker, and I work with Colleen at the American Association of Geographers. I'm the social media and engagement coordinator there. But being in social media research, a lot of my interests revolves around privacy and especially geo-privacy issues during this whole big data era that we live in now.
Hi, I'm Charla Beach. I'm a Science and Human Rights Coalition member representing the American Association of Geographers, and I'm a geography professor at the University of Texas. I've been involved in this wonderful coalition since about 2011, and I'm really excited that we are able to present to you all today some issues in geospatial research related to COVID and to human rights and ethics. Thanks.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Ranu Basu, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Geography at York University in Toronto in Canada. And this is my first AAS, but I've been very interested in some of I'm a social political geographer, and my work also deals with issues of ethics in GIS and geoprivacy issues. And I've worked a lot with issues of marginalization, exclusion, and social rights in the city. So I look forward to having discussions with those beyond a sort of interdisciplinary kind of discussion, broader discussion on ethics and how, as geographers, we might learn from others and what geographers also have much to contribute in this area. So over to you, Jonghyun.
Hello, my name is Jonghyun Kim, and I'm a third-year PhD candidate in the Department of Geography and GIS Science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I'm originally from South Korea, and I had my master's degree in urban planning in the same University of Illinois. But I started my PhD in geography starting in 2018. And my current academic advisor is Dr. Meipo Kwan. And my research interests include human daily mobility, travel behavior, and environmental health, and the application of GIS science methods and geoprivacy. And today, I'm very happy to virtually having discussed with all of you through this virtual environment to talk about this geoprivacy and ethic issues in this COVID-19 area and recent areas. Thank you.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, thanks. So hi, I'm Michelle Kinser. I am Government Relations Manager for the AEG. And while I don't work directly on geoethics here at the AEG, I do often get involved with issues of academic integrity and human rights as they relate to geographers around the world, and also as they relate to our public policy and advocacy fronts. We're always trying to look to build more partnerships in this space, and it's something I'd look forward to working with any of you on in the future. Please reach out if I can ever be of help to your organization or a resource to any of you. Again, the AEG has done a lot in this space, but we're always looking to do more, and I want to make myself a resource in that regard. So while I won't be participating in everything, I'll just drop my contact information in the chat and feel free to reach out.
Great. And then I'm Colleen. I am a senior geography researcher at the AEG, and I'm very excited to see all of you in this workshop. I hope we'll have a great discussion time. Again, for those who just joined us, we just went through quick introductions. If you want to share your camera, please feel free to do so. You'll have a chance to really discuss in this session and to get to know some of the scholars that are attending this conference. A bit of overview. I'm just going to provide a very brief background about this session. I'm going to welcome all of you to the workshop and also tell you what to expect and how we will engage in discussions on this topic. We'll go into moderated discussions. So we just went through introductions. We have 3 moderators today that will just basically guide the discussions during your breakout rooms. And then after that, we'll just come back in the main room, and I would like to, we would like to share all the thoughts that were discussed during these breakout sessions. So I'm so glad, again, that you're all here. And before we get into it, we want to give you some of the broader background and purpose for this workshop. You may wonder, why is the American Association of Geographers facilitating this workshop, and what do we have to offer on this topic of requirements for ethical geographic science in fast-paced research? This is what we'll go over today. A bit of background, breakout rooms, and then we'll summarize it. So just a bit of background. First of all, you can follow us on social media. If you are not aware of the AEG and want to know more about who we are, please feel free to follow us. Also, some of the discussions that we'll have today, our moderators are going to try to summarize in our newsletter in November. So if you're curious to read that summary, you'll be able to see it on social media. Basically, this workshop is part of our association 3-year strategic plan. The development of this plan was started about a year ago, and then it was approved by our council this year. And it identifies 10 strategic goals. We as an association and our members want to prioritize and show visible progress towards by the end of 2022. Among these 10 goals, one of them is for the AEG to formalize geoethics. Specifically, that means we want to facilitate conversations just like today about ethics in geography. And we don't want to just have conversation for the sake of conversation. We would like to build on our role as a convener between academics, policymakers, industry, to reach an audience that also goes beyond our own members, and in some cases even reach a broad and general audience. The issue of geoprivacy and ethics and the human rights aspect of the current events raise enormous questions that the general audience should hear about. So these conversations are not new. These are not things that we're launching right now. Each year, actually, our members are already engaging in similar discussions around ethical issues and human rights. And a few years ago, one of the main themes was geographies of human rights. We also have several specialty groups at our association that relate to this issue specifically, like ethics, justice, and human rights specialty group, or legal geography specialty group. So we want these discussions to continue. but we also want to elevate them. And today we have a broader audience, not just geographers, but across multiple disciplines. And so we're really interested to hear more thoughts beyond our own discipline. So we have this tie with the AAAS. We are a co-founding member of this alliance, and Cheryl here is our AEG representative. In this workshop, we explore and discuss the challenges and ethical questions that have become highly apparent during the pandemic. For example, COVID-19 calls upon researchers to navigate a really fast-paced scientific inquiry process that is under enormous public scrutiny. That, together with the abundance and availability of geographic data from emerging technologies and the real-time expectation and needs of governments, they have posed new challenges to traditionally accepted research methods and timelines, and the way we do collaboration and the parameters of data sharing in order to do research, and the public expectations of research outcomes. Our research outcomes have to come out immediately, not often leaving room for peer review sometimes. So thank you all for joining this forum. And so basically, we have our moderators here. I didn't get to share my slide earlier. It was up, but I wasn't aware that it wasn't up. But here we have our 5 moderators, Ranu, Jonghyun, and Cheryl. And they will each moderate a question. And I'll pass it to Emily to share with us how exactly you're going to pick a room.
Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, so like Colleen was saying, these kinds of discussions really can't wait until we're back face to face because the impacts of these things are happening right now. So we need to try to foster this environment where we're having these conversations despite all being in our houses and being virtual and all of these things. So these are the 3 questions that specifically each discussion room is going to focus on. You guys can read them through here, but think about which question you would particularly like to be part of that discussion. And then what we're going to do is sort everyone into breakout rooms based on which question you would like to participate directly in. I think, are there directions on the next slide, Colleen? Okay, so we'll go back to the question slide in a second, but I just wanted to show you the directions. Some of you, depending on what Zoom edition, I guess, that you have, how updated your Zoom is, might be able to put yourself in a breakout room on your own. But if you aren't, the easiest way to do that would be to put the question number of the room that you want to participate in right before your name. You can rename yourself and put that question number right there. And then I'll manually sort you into a room. And you'll see a pop-up button on your screen. And when that pops up, you just click it, and then it will take you to the discussion room that you chose. And within your room, you'll have your own chat box, you'll have your own moderator, and then you'll have time, about 50 minutes, to have a discussion about your question and whatever sub-questions that comes up. And then after 50 minutes, we'll bring everyone back into the main room. A button will pop up again on your screen to rejoin the main room. And we'll have sort of a recap in the main room so that you can hear what everyone else talked about in their rooms. So like I said, here are the 3 discussion questions. So please pick the one that you would like to participate in, and I can start sorting you into these interactive breakouts. During all of the conversations that were going on, So we'll start out with our first question, our first room here with Jonghyun.
Yeah, thank you. So in our breakout session, we had very interesting discussions in wide variety of topics related to the COVID-19 and contact tracing apps, facial recognitions. And the one thing that we first discussed is about the contact tracing apps using in the United States. And then we also think that it is very somewhat difficult to wisely manage the balance between the public health issues, public health benefits that can be gained by contact tracing apps, and also the privacy violation issues when introducing these kind of contact tracing apps. So that one was our some kind of warming up discussion at the first part of our session. And then we also move on to the discussion about facial recognitions. So one interesting, very funny thing about this facial recognition technology discussion is, so recently because people are wearing masks, so the facial recognition technology itself, the algorithm is difficult to detect which person is which person because the people are wearing masks. So we also discussed that some developers or computer scientists are developing new algorithms to detect which person is which person when they wear a mask. So we discussed that this kind of thing would be like an ongoing process, like a cycle thing, that a new technology, advancement of technology, the new way of people's behavior, something like that. And lastly, I would say that this is the most important topic that we discussed in today's session, is about the concept of consent. Because due to this new technology, such as facial recognition technology or drone, we agree that that concept of consent traditionally conceptualized becomes blurred, and it is even blurred between which boundary is public and which boundary is private. So as a future direction, we discussed that researchers and practitioners and policymakers should think about this, how we elaborate the concept of consent in the research and data collection. And I would say that this would be also very important, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic era. Yeah, that's all for our discussion. And I really appreciate for all the participants for your input. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll move on to Ranu's question, our second room, get an overview of what was discussed there.
Okay, thanks so much. And thanks to all the participants, a really fascinating group we had. So it took us a little while to get warmed up. And then by the time we were towards the end, we were really getting involved in some more detailed discussions on where we're at. But just to start off is that the group came from various backgrounds. We had two from forensic anthropology, international development, political science, and health. And so we started off sharing kind of our own research backgrounds, interests, and challenges. And the question of confidentiality was important and shared in different kinds of ways. So for instance, the question of who was involved in, whether it was groups of asylum seekers, for instance, migrant workers. When you're working internationally, how do you collect data? There was a question of neighborhood-based proxies for health outcomes when mapping takes place. There was discussions of using, when you're doing international research and you're based within a particular locale, how do you use Zoom and how, whether there's access to that or not. So there was a lot of questions of whose question was at stake, and how and what kind of confidentiality issues were involved. Then we talked about what geographers have contributed in terms of thinking about the geographical contributions of geospatial data. So we had a little bit discussions on the techniques and in terms of what kinds of techniques of data aggregation or scaling back or scaling forward. Towards the end, we also started talking about boundaries and territorial rights, maybe related to who's doing the defining of these, whether it's indigenous boundaries versus when you're thinking about settler societies and colonial societies, that. And also thinking about what other outside geography, what the contributions could be. So for instance, anthropologists and those who've been using questions of confidentiality and ethics for a long, long time have also drawn on ethnography. And so how ethnography might contribute towards reflecting on geospatial data. In terms of political science or thinking about statistical data, how is the again how are people identified? How could that be coded in different ways? Because of the repercussions might be who has access to such data. Their intentions may be good, but in terms of what the actual production of that data might look like and how that might be interpreted might lead to certain neighborhoods being stigmatized, could lead to further consequences of deportation and so forth. So those are the kind of careful questions, drawing on ethnography, drawing on health research. We talked a lot about how health data is quite often misinterpreted because of the rapid collection of data that is available. So one of the participants suggested to move forward to kind of slowing down our research, to think about it more carefully, how the process of journal reviews took place should also take into account other studies that are similar. And we also talked about was an interesting concept of using human rights to be forgotten as well, like not always identifying places, but also sometimes we need anonymity to safeguard the interests. And again, towards the end, we didn't get a chance to discuss this much, but we were just bringing up the question of indigenous mapping and other ways of non-colonial international-based frameworks for using data. And I'm just going to maybe defer to the group. Is there anything else I forgot, or you might like to add?
I think there's also mention of like being the gatekeeper of data that is collected, and so kind of like being like somebody might have, although you collected, what makes you the qualified person to share it and collect it, and then if it's not a person from, if you're not from the country where that data is being collected, then what makes you the right person to hold on to it and then be able to share it with others? I think that was an interesting point that was also brought up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, that was really. So, yep, that's our group.
I can see a lot of interrelated themes already from the first group and the second group, especially talking about like when we ask for consent, how we need to be confidential and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So we'll move to our third question here, Cheryl.
Sure, thank you, Emily. I'd really like to thank our group for a lively discussion, generating great interdisciplinary ideas. We had people coming from a variety of fields: physics, neuroethics, cell biology, medical writing, chemistry, biochemistry, law, business and human rights, public policy. So all kinds of interesting backgrounds coming together to discuss these topics. So the first question, carrying the burden of COVID-19 geospatial science. We talked about COVID notification tracking programs on mobile devices, and the option for people to be able to opt in and use these and not, and the unevenness of its availability, but also then the burden on the public to participate and to allow for the greater good of this information to be collected. And then linking these data to geographies was another burden of discussion. Another burden was, communities needing to bend the curve and pay attention to keeping hospitals beds clear for people who really need the help with the extreme cases of COVID, and the burden on the public to not burden the medical facilities with less urgent things. We also talked about adults carrying the burden in terms of the human subjects, because adults tend to be the first people who are in the trials for vaccines and other medical issues. Particular states may be using tracking, others may not, so there's kind of an uneven distribution of participation. And then linking COVID data to geographies when you get to smaller neighborhoods and you're encountering similar privacy issues as with census data, and the unintended consequences of identifying communities with COVID and exposing them to potential discrimination. But on the other hand, it's a double-edged sword. You also want to be able to identify communities that need the help and may have uneven access to assistance and be able to help them benefit. So linking neighborhoods to healthcare access and to stop them from being exposed to racial discrimination is important. Our second question was, who is benefiting from rapid geospatial COVID findings? And here too, adults, because they tend to be in the trials first. Children seem to be last. Also, the age of consent for participating in these tracking processes comes into play. Can children consent to tracking on their phones or not? So do they have rapid information at their school if there's an outbreak? Think of the high school student who tweeted the photo of all the kids in the hallway. Like they're the last to know. So other areas of benefit, the question came up was, when does the data collection stop, if ever? And how do we ensure that the research doesn't drop off? There were other discussions of particular benefits. The medical profession benefited from crossover research by physics, by studying how particles disperse in the air and what kind of filters can help with suppression of that. So there was some interfield, interdisciplinary benefits passed along by this rapid research. Then there's the question of the race to publish first versus getting it right, and all the ethics of approval and the ethic and of peer review, for instance. So I will open the floor to any of my fellow discussants if I've missed any important points in that point of discussion. And I want to thank Louise for being the scribe for our questions as well, and all of the folks in our session for their terrific ideas. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for reporting back. We have about a little less than 10 minutes of discussion. And this session was to start these discussions, but then also to think about what should be new requirements for science that aren't in place yet, but that should be. Cheryl, you just brought up wanting to publish first rather than get it right. We have this peer review process in place in science. We have IRB processes in place to safeguard some confidentiality issues and things like that. Are there new requirements that should be thought about in order to deal with these moments where we have to do rapid science and that involve a lot of confidential data? And if so, what would these requirements be? What do they look like? What do we require scientists to do from now on that they didn't used to need to do, but that we ask of them now? This is a really hard question, but
I'm thinking, particularly coming from the last panel presentation again, around ethics of challenge trials for COVID. I think more of a focus on human rights and justice. They spoke a little bit about maybe bioethics can be too much in utilitarianism, which can justify some things like challenge trials when you just look at the risk and benefits. But there hasn't been enough focus on the justice and the human rights side. And I think that the information is out there. They talked about the Hippocratic Oath and the Nuremberg trials, and I think really focusing on that side would be beneficial for us as a society.
I think somebody mentioned in our group kind of a way to kind of go forward with it is to have someone having like an oversight of the data collected, or having a committee that kind of also looks over the data, just to kind of ensure that it can be anonymous, but also almost more reliable than to just publish fast. So I think that might be, or kind of like creating more, maybe, I guess, going back to the human rights and justice issues of like more ethical view of the data that includes more people looking it over before it goes somewhere to be published for different actors to also use it, just because the way that it is collected isn't always the same way that it will be used by different entities or agencies as well. So kind of having more input before it goes out.
mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about in our group as well, I think it might have been Joel who mentioned, in terms of coding, how the coding actually takes place, which would be, there are more stricter boundaries in terms of confidentiality and privacy. So even that process, right, in terms of entering that data, so that questions of tracing and would be a little bit more restricted.
It strikes me that I think collaboration becomes incredibly important during all of these times where we need to have rapid science, right? I am very much in agreement with the comment that someone made earlier about the need to slow down science and have a more like slow science movement. And despite that, when we're trying to tackle something like COVID-19, we can't slow down too much. So it strikes me that the need for collaboration becomes so important, so that we have multiple people who are able to tackle things and maybe slow it down enough on their end on some level where we're not, having too many oversights. And so, I think that brings up a lot more challenges too, because we have these limitations in how we can gather right now, and yet collaboration is key in a lot of ways too.
There's one comment in the chat box from Judith Cohn. The importance to all of the data outweighs importance to one or to the researcher. Ownership of the study is not important to the consumer of that science. Judith, if you want to elaborate a little bit please feel free to do so. Or maybe, yeah, she's still here. You can unmute yourself. You don't have to share your camera if you can't. But so I'm intrigued by your sentence about ownership of a study not being important to the consumer of that science. And the reason I'm intrigued is because I feel like today we're all human subjects in research, whether we like it or not. Automated location tracking and all of that, just we are part of research. Our data is already being leveraged. And so as a consumer of science, I would argue that I'm also part of that science indirectly. But maybe I'm misunderstanding your point. I just wanted to, so we have about 5 minutes left and we can continue discussing this before everyone starts jumping off the call to join another session. I wanted to ask you all, what now? You had this great discussion, what do you do now? And the answer to that is keep in touch. If you've met someone and you had really great discussion and you would like to follow up with more discussion, you could have a call with that person just to deepen your thought. It doesn't always have to, you don't always have to connect to collaborate on research. You can simply connect in terms of thinking through certain problems a little bit more. And then maybe that ends up as research, but also spread this conversation. If there are any thoughts you heard today that are worthwhile spreading, just spread this conversation and continue the discussions beyond this workshop. Look out for our November AEG newsletter. We will be summarizing some of the discussions we had today, but also during a participatory forum we had a few weeks back, where our moderators will be featured. And follow us at the AEG on social media if you want to know more about the AEG and you haven't heard of us yet. The QR code you see on the screen is a link to a survey. We are actually really interested to try to figure out how we create connection online among strangers, just like all of you today. We used to have to do that in person, and now we're switched to a virtual platform. We've tried a participatory forum, which looks very similar to what you did just today. How do we engage scholars across disciplines on these overarching topics of science, on ethics, on human rights? And if you like this format, just tell us why you liked it particularly, so we really are interested in your feedback there. We have about 3 minutes, and so I just want to open the floor for more conversation, thoughts. If there's any one thought that you learned today that you feel like you're gonna spread beyond this workshop, it would be lovely to hear that from you.
Well, I've put my email address in the chat box because since this is like the first virtual Science and Human Rights meeting, coalition meeting we've had, I'm not sure what the nature of a contact list looks like. So, you know, I hope that anyone who participated in this conversation, if you'd like to get connected, let me know. I see Ranu has added hers as well. We can be found through the American Association of Geographers as well. I just think this is a great beginning of conversations that many disciplines should be having, especially cross-disciplinary conversations. And I appreciate all of your comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody. Thank to the group. We started off slow, as I said, because we were just trying to figure out how to get. But towards the end, I think we were getting into lots of interesting discussions. So there is it took a while to kind of bring everyone and to warm up and to figure out where our common ground was. But one of the interesting things that also came out that I think at the end was how do we, in terms of moving it forward, bringing it back to the educational domain in terms of courses, in terms of frameworks to use, and that could incorporate not just geography, but from beyond. So thanks again.
I think our time is officially up here. But again, thank you all for joining in these conversations. They're so incredibly important, especially now when we can't be face-to-face. And so we appreciate you very much participating. And thanks again so much to our amazing moderators. I know Jonghyun had to leave a little early, but thank you, Ranu and Cheryl. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of this conference.
Well, thank you, Emily and Colleen, for organizing this, and to the AAAS for assisting us, and to Joel for keeping us on air as well. And thank you, everyone. It was great to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone, Abel, and thank you, Laura, as well, for taking the notes, and thanks to all of you.
Okay. Well, have a great day, everyone. I think there's some kind of open forums later in the afternoon in the AAAS schedule if you all want to get together and talk with folks more informally as well.